Tonight on Nation to Nation, federal Indigenous inmates have reached a record high, but it's also a problem in Ontario's provincial jails.
I've also been to the Kenora jail where they told me it was close to 100%.
The co-host of Ottawa's Inuktitut-language radio show is in the studio. Here's her response to whether this guy is on her wish list of guests.
I probably wouldn't want him on my show, so he's probably not on my list.
Is the Metis National Council in danger of breaking up? Manitoba President David Chartrand blames Ontario for giving non-Métis people citizenship.
Always prevented anybody from stealing our identity. Now we have the wolf at the door. We got to stop that.
I'm Todd Lamoran, and welcome to Nation. The incarceration rates of Indigenous inmates has hit a new high. 30% of all federal inmates are identified as Indigenous, while representing about 5% of the total population of Canada. The highest numbers are in the prairies, especially in Saskatchewan, where 75% of federal inmates are Indigenous. But the provincial jails, particularly here in Ontario, are in a crisis itself. Talk about all this and more is the Chief Commissioner of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, Renu Mandani. Thank you for joining me here on Nation to Nation, Commissioner Mandani.
Thanks for having me.
Why are Ontario jails in crisis?
The main issue relates to overcrowding. So, the rates of remand for prisoners has gone up dramatically over the last few decades. We're now at a point where about 70% of the population in provincial jail are on remand, which means that they have not been convicted of any criminal offense, but they are being held pending disposition of their charges. So what that means is across the province, jails that were meant to house, for example, in Thunder Bay, approximately 120 people are sometimes reaching upwards of 200 people. And of course, because the infrastructure is old, it means that there are people in unsafe and unsanitary conditions.
And I imagine when we're talking about remand, that a lot of, or a good portion of these are Indigenous offenders.
Yeah, so I was at the Thunder Bay Jail on Tuesday, and I did a walkthrough, and I asked the superintendent there how many of the folks were Indigenous, and he said about 75% of the population identifies as First Nations. I've also been to the Kenora Jail where they told me it was close to 100%. And I've also been to Metis where, again, the rates were somewhere between 50 and 75%. So, definitely in the north, the vast majority of people who are being held in custody on remand are Indigenous.
Now, I know that after you did your tour of the Thunder Bay Jail, you did a presentation before the Provincial Standing Committee on Finance, its pre-budget consultations. So what did you ask them to help do something about this situation?
So what was unique about that is we actually managed to put together a joint submission with the union that represents frontline correctional staff. And together we tried to really think about what were short-term investments that could yield at least make the conditions for prisoners and for staff safe and in the short term. And so we prioritized things that would not require, for example, new infrastructure or new legislation. So our main recommendations were to increase the availability of bail so that people who can be safely managed in the community are able to be managed outside of prisons and jails. We also asked for dedicated resources for frontline staff so that they have the training and resources they need. We also asked for basic access to health and mental health care because, just for example, in Thunder Bay, they have a population, of about 150 to 200 people who have very complex health needs. And while they do have a doctor that's available on call, they only have a psychiatrist twice a month. So, there's a real lack of resources for just rehabilitation. And in relation to Indigenous prisoners in particular, we asked for culturally appropriate and sensitive programming. For example, again, we heard that while the jail had made a lot of efforts in Thunder Bay to put up an area that could be used for ceremony, that because they tend to be short-staffed, that space wasn't really accessible for inmates because they were often on lockdown and couldn't actually access the yard space where there was a ceremonial tent erected. So, we are asking for very much really frontline resources to be invested to help correctional officers and prisoners on a very day-to-day basis.
Do you think any of the recommendations that you've made, or from, I know correctional investigator Ivan Ziger talks about federal prisoners, and of course Bill C-83 again isn't about provincial jails. There's lots of recommendations out there that do you think the Ford government will listen to?
Well, one encouraging sign is they have announced that they'll be hiring more correctional officers and providing more staff training on mental health and human rights. So I think that's quite positive. It's yet to be seen whether they will make investments that are more directly targeted at prisoners, especially in relation to healthcare and mental health care. The Commission is currently involved in a matter, the Jean settlement, which relates to the provision of mental health care for prisoners. And we expect to receive a final report from Justice David Cole on whether the government's complied with that settlement. And if they have not, we will be considering whether to take further legal action to force the government to put more resources into the system.
Do you think that'll help? I know you've called the whole system dehumanizing. First, what did you mean by that? And will what you've said help with that?
Yeah, I could just maybe paint a little bit of a picture. When I was at the Thunder Bay Jail on Tuesday, when I did my walkthrough, I had the opportunity to meet with prisoners, many First Nations prisoners, and the conditions that I could describe are, people in a cell that's about 12 by 6 feet. There are 4 people housed in the cell. There's a bunk bed with an individual sleeping underneath the bunk bed with about 6 inches of clearance above them. There's another individual sleeping on the floor with their legs straddling a toilet, so that if anybody needs to use the toilet, they actually need to step on somebody's bedding and step around their feet to sit on the toilet. And when the jail is in lockdown, which is multiple days, upwards of 10 days a month, people are locked in those conditions for 24 hours continuously. So you can imagine the Thunder Bay Jail and many of the jails have very high rates of violence, both inmate on inmate and inmate on staff. And, that's a perfect pressure cooker type of situation, which I think very few people would be at their best in a situation like that.
Now, you've also, of course, done some work on child welfare in Ontario. Do you think child welfare has played a role in any of this?
Oh, certainly. I think, the Commission's done work on education, child welfare, and the criminal justice system. And I think there are certainly the school to prison pipeline, the child welfare to prison pipeline. These are all realities. Many of the people I talked to on Tuesday talked about their experiences of institutionalization, and that those experiences started in the child welfare system, where they weren't given the capacity to really live an independent life, to get an education. And, their institutionalization continues in the criminal justice system.
Commissioner Mandani, I want to thank you for taking some time to talk to me.
Thank you for having me.
After the break, we speak with the co-host of Ottawa's Inuktitut-language radio station. Welcome back. It's often been said that Ottawa is home to more Inuit than Iqaluit, the capital of Nunavut. They come here for a variety of reasons: education, healthcare, and employment, and many stay. So it's a bit of a surprise that up until 9 months ago, there was no radio broadcast in Inuktitut. That changed when Inuktitut hit the airwaves on Carleton University's radio station. And one of its hosts is here to talk about it. But before I talk to her, here's a bit of Jesse Kangok in action, starting with Inuktitut's theme song.
Missing and murdered Indigenous women 13 million.
The show airs every other Wednesday from 11 to noon, and it offers up a smorgasbord of music, studio guests, and community events, presented here by co-host Janet Evik.
A support group for people willing to change their addictive behavior.
The show is an offshoot of Inuktitut, a Montreal-based program that launched in 2016. About the Ottawa version, Kangok has said that for twice a month she can forget she lives in Ottawa. So there was a bit of you in action. How did you get the job?
I didn't apply for the job. I noticed it on Facebook through the Tungasugvinga Inuit homepage. I followed them on Facebook, and I noticed that they had a job opening for radio hosts and producers and editors. I was in the process of trying to start my own business from working from home, and I was translating and I was translating for Tungasugvinga Inuit in different little contracts. And Anna Loge at the time was working with that file, and she was in one of the meetings that I was translating for, and she approached me and asked me if I'd like to come in and listen and learn more about their Inuktitut-language vision. And when I went in and I got to learn and meet Janet and Angeline, I just couldn't help myself and get connected. I had no intentions, or my intentions was to be a listener and really just hear where we're at as a Inuit community here in Ottawa.
Well, it certainly looks like from what we saw, you get right into it and you know what you're doing.
I do now. It took me about 9 months. I finally did my own buttons today, so I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable, unlike my first time trying to figure out which buttons and where the buttons are. But once you get it, it gets smoother.
What kind of feedback have you gotten from people here in Ottawa?
A lot of feedback has been very positive, even though for me, I know for my own episodes, I like to talk about real issues. And it has been very positive, and I believe that's what keeps me coming back monthly, just to deliver on some current issues that we're facing as a whole as a community, and just hearing the feedback of how they're able to just find hope or just feel less isolated or feel more connected, and just seeing the children being able to practice their culture in an environment where we literally have nothing is always the most beneficial. Hearing the children singing and learning the language.
You mentioned you bring your own issues to the show. I know that from reading a past report that you said there's a difference between the Ottawa show and the Montreal show. There's a different atmosphere in Ottawa. Just walking down the street, you said.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
What I mean is that, like, if you look at the map of Canada, it's divided by many different provinces, and I believe that the barriers that are different between Montreal and Ottawa is the government. They have different policies, they have different visions and different views on how the Indigenous takes part in media and inclusiveness, and I think Ontario is a lot more open and more diverse and promoting. So I think that's why we have more that ability to promote and share what we're facing as a whole and how we can move forward. And I think that for Nipivut has done an amazing job with the barriers that they face, and they continue to not only promote the Inuktitut-language but also the Francophone, and I think it's important that they're able to connect that way.
Of course, this is the nation's capital. You kind of alluded to that in your previous answer, but being the nation's capital, does that affect how you approach who you have on your show and how you interview them?
Yes, I think that's my whole reason why I do what I do, because we are in the nation's capital where policies are made, where decisions are made, and I believe that it's time that Inuit's perspective is heard, and not only heard but also understood more, you know, of how we can move forward or what's important to us regarding the issues that we face. For example, the Inuit culture has a great traditional knowledge, the IQ, and they have an amazing restorative justice about equality. I think that's a great way, core way to go of systems. Yeah.
I noticed the first show of the new year was called Positive Messages. Now, I don't know if the sudden passing of throat singer Kelly Fraser had anything to do with that.
Yes, it had everything to do with that, because we were very excited to promote her, to work with her more in the future. I had the opportunity to meet her when she came here, when my aunt Atua Akati received the Inspiration Award. I had the opportunity to spend the afternoon with her, and I got to know her, and I'm very proud of the ladies that were able to promote Kelly for who she was. She loved the Inuit culture, she loved the youth, and I'm really happy that they were able to show her shine through our new legend. Yeah, Kelly Fraser.
How much of a punch to the stomach, though, was that her sudden passing?
It's still a shocker. I think it's a little bit confusing because she's so young, and it was so sudden, and also having to see her in the media, still having to see her news about her, and knowing that she did develop this beautiful video with Isuma Production that they had started up in Igloolik. And I look forward to seeing that. If they did finish it, that would be amazing to see her completed work, her last project. That was very important to her. And yeah, I think it's very just surreal, because you know she's passed on, but at the same time she left us a great piece of treasures.
And to look forward to the future now, guess what's on the horizon? Do you think you'll have the Prime Minister on your show anytime soon?
I probably wouldn't want him on my show, so he's probably not on my list, but we hear from him too much. He's got a lot of mic and a lot of voices, and I think it's time that we hear from people that are working on the ground up, who are policymakers, entrepreneurs, and who work within the communities in education and in the family system. Those are the people that I would love to hear from, that are working day to day to ensure that our Canadian system is moving forward for something better.
Well, sounds great. Sounds like you do a little bit of what we do here on Nation to Nation. It's every Wednesday, 11 to noon, as I said, on 93.1 here in Ottawa, but it's on the internet as well.
Yes, on demand. You can catch us on www.ckcufm.com.
Oh, sounds great.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Kangok, for doing this. Thank you for talking to me.
Awesome. Thank you for having me here, Todd. It was awesome to meet you.
We'll have more after another short break. Welcome back. The Métis National Council is facing the biggest crisis in its more than 35-year existence. On Friday, the Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario provincial organizations announced a tri-council group. They allege a lack of transparency and accountability from the MNC and a need for the national body to be more reformed. Manitoba Métis Federation President David Chartrand denied the allegations.
They don't clarify what the reforms are. Each of them were at the table getting their hands out when we negotiated $2.5 billion. They didn't participate. Alberta never participated in any fashion. Neither did any of those presidents really participate in negotiations for the money that we were able to negotiate through housing, education, economic development, and I set all the training money. I led all the negotiations. They did not participate, but they were there to get their checks. So when they say there's no transparency, the non-transparency is coming that they don't participate in any fashion. So what they're trying to do is change the channel.
Chartrand says the real issue is identity and originates from putting the Métis Nation of Ontario on probation in 2018 because, he alleges, they are accepting members from outside the Métis homeland.
Then Ontario could continue to adopt and bring in hundreds of thousands and potentially millions of people in to claim that they're Métis Nation citizens now. That cannot happen and will never happen. We call it a third invasion. When we look at 1870, when Riel was afraid that we'd be swamped by settlers and we'd lose our homes, our lands, and our rights. It happened in Batoche in 1885. Again, we were protecting our homes and our rights and our nation and our families. Now we're being attacked in the new millennium by our own supposed to be people in the back rooms. This is the most dangerous invasion we'll see coming, and it can affect us and our children for generations to come.
Chartrand says a new body created by the three provincial organizations could derail the relationship between Métis and the federal government. He points to the $2.5 billion in Métis-specific funding in recent federal budgets.
Now we're sitting in a position where they are jeopardizing with this new tri-council, this new body. I don't know where the spokesman is going to be yet. I'd love to see what a spokesman is. But at the end of the day, we're supposed to be negotiating now new legislation for health for the Métis. That could be up in jeopardy. We're supposed to have a meeting with the Prime Minister. Why would the Prime Minister want to meet with us now at this point in time? And so they're jeopardizing instead of negotiating. They're saying, I'm going to wait till 2020 when I see how much checks will come from Canada to the Métis National Council and take my share. Then I will kill the Métis National Council and create a new organization. That's what they're saying.
Saskatchewan President Glenn McCallum says the issue is that the Métis National Council ignores provincial organizations. APTN News and Nation and Nation made repeated but unsuccessful attempts for Ontario President Margaret Froh to comment. That's our show for this week. I'm Todd Lamoureux. Thanks for watching.